It's no surprise the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting lockdowns have put strain on the mental health of many Canadians. And while multiple studies have looked at the increased consumption of alcohol during lockdown, what about cannabis? According to a study by the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, 52% of existing cannabis users in Canada reported an increase in consumption during the first wave of the pandemic. The study's senior author, Elton-Marshall, calls the increase expected.
I know that some recent data has come out showing that people are just as anxious and depressed as ever right now.
Data was collected through an online survey of adults residing in Canada, examining their cannabis consumption habits during 3 points between May and June 2020. The study found higher usage rates among Ontarians, individuals with lower education levels, and those who reported concerns with personal finances.
What was interesting is that while we didn't see any increases at the population level, so we saw about 12% of Canadians overall indicating that they had used cannabis in the last week, it was really among the people who were existing cannabis users.
Statistics Canada data shows the country's cannabis retail sales were highest in December 2020, but this doesn't take into account homegrown cannabis or cannabis sold illegally. 25-year-old Carmen Stiller of Uxbridge, Ontario, works in the cannabis industry. They say they've not only seen an increase in the amount of cannabis purchased, but also returning clients visiting the store more often to buy products.
So those large THC value products are just absolutely flying off the shelves, and especially in the early stages of the pandemic, because people were so interested in finding something that would just take them away from their everyday.
Stiller's personal experience mirrors that of many of the store's clients, with their own personal cannabis use increasing. But for them, it was mainly due to boredom.
I kind of realized how much more cannabis I was going through, because a lot of it ties into your personal spending habits, right? So I realized how much, in comparison to my decreased income, how much I was outputting on cannabis, and that's what really made the connection for me in terms of how much more I was using.
For other users, like 38-year-old Morgan Yu of Toronto, shifting to CBD products has been key to avoiding brain fog.
At the beginning, I used it more heavily than I do now. Now it's very occasional, and it's really more restricted to CBD oil at this point. Whereas for a long time, it was definitely like some with active THC and dabbling a lot with like amounts and percentages and styles of consumption.
Stiller notes this is a trend they've also seen at store level during the pandemic's second wave.
They're trying to find ways that cannabis can help them with the rest of their problems, which I think is kind of the natural progression from where we started at the beginning of the pandemic. People were like, okay, I gotta get high, I gotta forget about my daily life. Now people are saying, okay, how can cannabis enhance my daily life instead of taking me away from it?
Dr. Gabriela Gobi, a psychiatrist at the McGill University Health Centre in Montreal, warns users should consider the negative side effects of cannabis if it's consumed in large quantities over a long period of time.
So the more cannabis you consume, in particular if you have a subject at risk for psychosis, the more the chances that you develop an episode of psychosis are higher. Then we know also that cannabis in long term can be also associated, especially young people, to the risk of developing depression, a major depression episode. And this is another also important issue.
Elton-Marshall says there is concern that cannabis habits picked up during the pandemic may stick around.
It may be the case that people are starting to develop these habits over time where they might think, well, it's okay because it's only temporary during the pandemic. But the concern is that this continues on even after the pandemic.
As with alcohol, what exactly the impacts are of this increased cannabis use during the pandemic in both the short and the long term remains to be seen. For the 52% of existing cannabis users in Canada who increased their usage during the first wave of the pandemic, Elton-Marshall believes the data should be monitored over time. Alexia Kapralos, Global News.